Hebrews 11 comes to mind when I think of faith, and verse 1 says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Right? The couple words that I think are pretty key in this sentence are the words assurance and conviction. The word assurance comes from a Greek word that literally means to stand under or support. So it's referring to a foundational type thing, that this assurance is setting there, and our faith is built upon the assurance. It's built on it. Our faith in God is our foundation to our lives, and it's what drives our passions, what drives our interests. It drives what we say, how we think, what we do, and what motivates us to do the things we do. It's all driven by our faith. I didn't get up and come to church today just because it's something I do. I mean, just because it's a habit, or because I didn't have any other better offers. It's because I wanted to, right? I got up and I came to church this morning because I have an assurance that God is real, that there's value in this, that we as followers of God have come to worship a living, real, true God. He's not a figment of our imagination. He's not make-believe. I mean, he is real, and that is the foundation to my faith. So it drives the things that I do and how I live. This assurance we have in God gives us the conviction or the confidence that what God says is true. So when our emotions may pull us one way, or our desires may tempt us and try to get us to act another way, but God's word says to live and act in a different way, it is our faith that kicks in and overrides our emotions, overrides our temptations, says, yeah, this makes sense to me, but this is what God says, and God wins every time. That's faith. That is putting our faith in action, the foundation that we believe in God, that He is real, which means what He said is real. That is a foundation to our life. That's what these verses are talking about. Now, faith is only as good as the object of which your faith is put in. Right? If you have two cars, one of them is like brand new and every perfect condition and nice new battery and a full tank of gas and everything's perfect, you have full confidence that when you turn that key, the ignition is going to turn and the engine is going to turn on, right? I mean, it's not a shock to you. You're not like, oh, I didn't see that coming. You've had full faith that was going to happen. If you have an older car that has maybe a whole lot of miles on it and all the things are starting to wear out on it, and you're starting to replace pieces and you may not have enough gas, you're not sure, and the battery probably really ran out about a year ago, but you're still trying to stretch, and it's the first like super cold day of the year, you put the key in and turn the ignition, you're not all that confident, are you? I mean, you hope maybe it's going to start, but if it doesn't, you're like, because it wasn't that solid of a thing to put your faith in. Solid faith is confidence. A less solid object, it doesn't bring that much confidence. The Christ follower puts our faith in Jesus, and He is reliable 100% of the time. Right? He's not the old car, He's the new car. He's the one who is always right. He told the waves to calm down on a stormy day, and what happened? They calmed down. Now, if He did it 100 times, how many times did the waves calm down? 100 times. He's always reliable. Every single time. When He speaks, even nature listens to Him. Demons listen to Him. Flesh listens to Him. When dead people are dead and He says, hey, Lazarus, you come on out, what happens? Every time. Resurrection. Because He's Jesus, right? He is God. He is reliable. He never fails. He is always right. He always does what's right. So if someone is a leper, He says, you're healed, they're healed. Every time. If they're blind, He says, I want you to see. They see every time. They're deaf, He wants them to hear. It's just always true. That is the God we put our faith in. So when He died and overcame death itself and came back 3 days later and told you, hey, I'm coming back one of these days, what does that mean? He's going to come back. I mean, it's just going to happen. He's not like, ha, psych, He's like, we're not going to die someday and say, the whole thing was silly, ha. No, He's really going to do it. When He says He's preparing a place for us, we can assume what? He's preparing a place for us because he's always right. He's always truthful. He's always come through in the past for us, for other people. His word is always accurate every single time. He is consistently powerful, which gives us complete confidence that he will continue to work powerfully in our life. He has never failed us, never been wrong, never been unfaithful. So our object of our faith, Jesus, is the highest confidence that we can have. Now, I love this church, but my faith is not in this church because it's full of you and me. And people will fail me. I will fail you because I'm the humanness, right? My faith is in Jesus. Now, we happen to be Jesus people, so I have a higher faith in you than I might have the, people on the road or something. But still, you're human. There's going to be human failure in humans. I don't trust any pastor beyond what they deserve because they're human. Right? Don't trust any preacher that they're always right. You check them, test them, read the scripture, make sure they're accurate and actually following the scripture. You can only trust them so far. My faith is not in my emotions. I have strong emotions. I really feel strongly about some things. I could be wrong. My faith is in God. Because see, the problem is my emotions might jump around a little bit here and there. I might feel differently when I'm hungry about something than when I'm not hungry. I may be a little more impatient when I'm hungry than when I'm feeling satisfied, with food or whatever. I can't trust my emotions. I can't trust even my knowledge. I can only trust God. He is consistent all the time. So my faith is in God, the Creator, all-knowing, all-powerful, ever-present God. Because of that faith, I allow God's definition of sin always to override my definition of sin. Because he's right, always. I think I'm right. Or the people around me think they're right. I always allow God's definition of marriage or dating or finances or eternity or whatever. Throw in any subject, any topic, doesn't matter. It always overrides man's definition of mating or marriage or dating or finances or eternity or whatever. I completely trust every single word in this book because it's written and inspired by a holy, perfect God. My faith's based on that. See, I have an assurance because he's always right. He's always right. Now, that kind of kicks off chapter 11, and the rest of chapter 11 is a series of very short references to a number of people throughout human history, biblical history, that lived out their faith in some way. And the author of Hebrews is saying, see, this guy, this is what I'm talking about. This is faith. This is what we're talking about. This guy, that's the faith that we're talking about. It starts in verse 4 with Abel. Abel. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts, and through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. Right? Now, we don't know all the details on this offering that took place, the sacrifice that was given to God. I mean, this is the children of Adam and Eve. This is like early on, even that early they were taking offerings, right? Different than what we think of as an offering. I mean, there was a sacrifice given to God, a dedication. We love you, God. We value you. And there was something in Abel's offering and sacrifice that was more acceptable than Cain's sacrifice. It's just there is something more valuable there. Abel's actions sprung forth from the foundation of his faith in God. God has so much value, he gave up whatever that offering was. And Cain's must have been less value, and so it was unimpressive to God. I guess it just begs the question as you examine your giving pattern, does it reflect your view of God? Maybe a better way to say that is your giving pattern does reflect your view of God and your faith in him. Verse 5, Enoch. There's more. By faith, Enoch was taken up so he should not see death. And he was found because God had taken him. Now before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And without faith, it's impossible to please God. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Very unusual little story here. I mean, he never died ever. God just came and took him away, and he never physically died, and God just took him to heaven one day. It was somehow connected to his faith, to how he lived out his life on earth. I believe in God, and that affects the way I live my life. That's how Enoch looked at life. And the author of Hebrews adds this little commentary in verse 6 there. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Whoever would draw near to God must believe he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. See, our spiritual journey begins with this faith that understands God exists, and he is holy, and he is right, and he is good, and he is perfect, and he's all those things. He is this rock, right? It begins with that, and that faith leads us into relationship with him. The deeper your faith with God, the closer you are in your relationship. I truly believe that when I speak to God, he's listening to me. I mean, he actually cares about what I have to say. The God of the universe, the God who created everything, actually wants to hear from me. And so when I'm driving down the road and I'm praying in my car, I do that because I believe he's listening. It's a faith thing. I believe, therefore it leads to my action. Yes, I believe God's listening. Why don't I say something? It leads to a deeper relationship. I have all kinds of little quirky things about me. If I see an airplane that's about ready to land or that's taking off, I always pray for them. I don't know, I just do. Probably because it freaks me out. Every time I'm in one, I think, this is the most dangerous time of a flight, And so I always pray, God, just help that airplane to land, blah, blah, blah. I have this little prayer. Why? I don't know. Because I do know why. Why would I waste my time with that prayer? Other than I believe God hears the prayer and says, okay, we're gonna help this. We're gonna make sure this one doesn't crash. So hope that when you land in Des Moines sometime, I'm driving up and I see your plane. I'm helping you out, right? I honestly believe that. That's why I keep praying. Anytime I see an ambulance or a fire truck, any type of emergency vehicle, or I hear it, it's something in me. I just pray, Lord, I don't know where they're going, but someone's having an emergency. Would you intercede? Help them get there safely, blah, blah, blah. I pray for those people because I genuinely believe it makes a difference. Makes a difference. If I didn't genuinely believe that, I wouldn't pray. And if I didn't pray, I wouldn't have a relationship. But because I believe, I pray, and it builds, the relationship grows deeper. That Enoch, and God had this relationship. Why? Because he believed in God. Of course I prayed. Of course I talk to you. Of course we communicate. You're God. Yeah, of course I do that. Verse 7, we bring in Noah. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this, he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. Now, can you appreciate the faith Noah had to have? I mean, we've been hearing that story since we were kids, if you grew up in Sunday school. Oh yeah, Noah in the ark. I mean, this is an incredible story. God says a flood is going to come and destroy the world, and Noah is to build an ark. Well, if we understand the story correctly, it had never rained prior to this time. I mean, there were things that just never happened. So God is saying something that has never happened before. There's never been flooding. There's never been rain. There's never been a disaster like this. It's going to happen. Build an ark. Something Noah believed that whatever God was saying was going to happen actually was going to happen. Because we know that because he built the ark. I mean, are you appreciating how unusual that was? It'd be like God coming to us and saying, here's the deal. I'm going to destroy the world with tapioca pudding. Build a giant spoon. You'd be going, I don't even know what that means. I don't know how to process that. Noah didn't, what do you mean rain? What do you mean flood? It just didn't make sense. But what would you do? If you have faith, you go, well, okay, that sounds really weird, but I'm going to build a giant spoon, and you start building it. That's faith. You have this assurance that who spoke it is true and real and has authority and is really going to happen. And because of that assurance, you say, yes, I'm going to go ahead and build the giant spoon. That's basically the story of Noah. It happened to be water and an ark, all right? And he did it. In verses 8 through 12, we hear about Abraham and how he moved to a place he didn't know. God sent him to a new place, and he was to receive an inheritance that he never really was able to see, and that he would father descendants that he would never live long enough to enjoy. And the author of Hebrews puts a little commentary about all these people in verse 13 when he says, these all died in faith, having not received the things promised, but having seen them and greeting them from afar. So God said it, and they just believed it because God's trustworthy. Like, okay, God, I don't see this happening. I don't get it. I mean, they had moments where they kind of wandered, but that got them in trouble. But they're like, okay, God said this is going to happen. I'm just going to do it. God said to move. I guess I'll move. God said have kids. I guess I'll do what has to happen to have children. It was an act of faith. Now, if a neighbor told Abraham, hey, I want you to move to a foreign land where you don't know, leave your family and start over, there's no credibility there. Abraham would be like, I think I'll stay here. Thank you. But it was God who said it, who had credibility, and his faith said, I'll go ahead and go. If a neighbor told Noah, hey, we're going to have big storms, there's going to be a flood, build a large boat, we're going to save all the animals and your family, Noah would have been like, You've taken a lot of communion lately, haven't you? I mean, you're not reliable. But since it was God who was reliable, he did it. It was an assurance that led to a conviction and caused him to make those changes, to make those actions in his life. Hebrews goes on to talk more about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Esau and Joseph and Moses and the people as they left Egypt. I mean, there's all these stories that is referred to in the book of Hebrews. And he goes down this list talking about all these key people from Israel's history, which we could talk about, for a long time. And he finally wraps it up by saying in verse 32 through 40, what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with a sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and in caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. Whew. All these stories of faith wrapped into a couple little paragraphs. Here is three big lessons that I think is important for us to live, to take home and really live this stuff out in your Christian faith from Hebrews 11. Number one, don't worry about doing big things. Just be faithful doing what you're doing. Right? How many times do you read the story of David and Goliath and you want to be David? We're all like, yeah, David, I want to kill the giant, Or we read about Noah, it's like, yeah, I want to build the ark. Rarely do we think about, well, I'd like to be the neighbor who dies. We don't put ourselves there. Or in the story of David and Goliath, when the armies are there and their big challenge, I want to be the soldier that's sitting under the tree. We don't know his name because he didn't do anything. I want to be that guy. I mean, we don't usually think that. We always interject ourselves into the story as the hero. We want to be the big guy, right? What if you look at these stories as they're just common people who happen to be living out their faith, just doing what God called them to do specifically at that moment? Abraham was told to move and have kids, so he moved and had kids. Now that flourishes and becomes into the nation of Israel, which eventually leads to Jesus. He didn't know that. He's just saying, I guess we're moving. Hey, Sarah, pack up, we're leaving. Where are we going? I don't know. God will tell us. What? I mean, he's just being obedient. He just moved. That's faithfulness. God took care of the rest in the story. David, in the story of David and Goliath, if you read through that, he was just told to go feed his brothers. Hey, Dave, feed your brothers. They're soldiers. They're heroes. You're just a shepherd boy. Go out and feed them. Okay. He was just obeying his dad. He got out there and he's like, hey, who's this giant? What's the deal? Led to the slaying of a dragon. He wasn't out that morning thinking, what's a dragon I can take down, No, he's just doing his life, living as God called him to do, being faithful. This is true with all the biblical stories. They're just people living out their faith. God tells them to do something, and they just do it. They have no idea what God's plan is. They have no idea what the end result's going to be. They just do what they're told when they're told to do it. They didn't know they were changing the course of history. They didn't know they were impacting the world. I'm just doing what God said. When I was in college, I was pretty confident that God had called me to be the next Billy Graham. I was working, taking a couple semesters of school, and some guy had taken me out for supper and said, hey, we have this church on the east side here in Des Moines that we need a preacher. You want to come preach? And I'm like, yeah. And I thought, this is it. This is the beginning. There were like 15 people at that church, and I thought, man, before we know it, we're going to sweep the east side, where everybody's going to be Jesus people, and we're going to take over. I mean, where did I come up with that? I don't know, because I was dressed for success. That was the 80s. I had a tie on, and I was like, oh, I got the right shoes. People are going to come in droves to hear about Jesus. I think I really honestly thought that. I was going to have best-selling books and be a sought-after person to go to all the conferences and tell a story of God's story, but really I did this, and you want me to sign that book? How do you want me to, I had that vision in the back of my head. Did you notice the word I comes up a lot in this story? I was going to do that, and I was going to do that, something else, and I was going to be impressive. One day it dawned on me, out of the billions and billions and billions of people who have been born and come and gone on our planet, there was one Moses. We're not all Moses. There was one Joseph. There was one Apostle Paul. They were just dudes doing what God called them to do. We'll let the women in. Mary, there was only one Mary. She was just minding her own business. Hey, you're going to birth Jesus. Oh, okay. May be as the Lord said. They're just people obeying God through faith, doing what they're called to do. And they weren't necessarily all that super. They were just obedient. They weren't waking up, making the goal of how I'm going to get my name in the Bible and 4 easy steps. They weren't, hoping to take over countries. They just were doing what God led them to do. We look at the plagues of Moses and him pulling the people out of Egypt to slavery, almost like a man. He really had this great plan to bring down Egypt with a single strike, single-handedly. But that's not how it was at all. He was just a guy who said, okay, God, you said to do this. I don't really want to, but I will. God pulled him into it, and he only knew what he needed to know on a need-to-know basis. He knew what I was doing. I know what God said to do today. I don't know what's happening tomorrow. And then he'd do his thing, and then the next day, here's a new assignment. Okay. And he just kept getting new assignments and just kept doing it. It wasn't Moses' plan. It was God's plan. It was God's story. The story of Joseph is really cool for us, but it wasn't really all that cool for him. He was sitting there rotting in a jail for years. That wasn't a lot of fun. He was hated by his brothers. He was sold as a slave, imprisoned for something he didn't even do. And it was after years and years and years of faithfully following God, even in some situations that led to painful experiences, he somehow became the second in command of Egypt. That wasn't his goal in life. God brought him there. It was through his daily obedience. He's a slave, and the slave owner's wife comes in, and he wants to seduce Joseph, and Joseph's like, well, all he knew is God didn't want me to do what she wants me to do, and he's like, what do? She owns me. I'm a slave. I could easily justify this and say, I'm just doing what the slave owner told me. Or I could run. And so he just runs. He just, out of obedience, says, I'm going to obey God over man. I'm going to do what God says, not what I want. And he tears out of, that's what got him in jail in the first place, because he left his coat behind. And she says, look at this guy trying to rape me. Can you believe it? He did this. And he goes to jail. I mean, like he was kind of cheated. Not kind of, he was. But he was just being obedient. And his obedience led to all kinds of God-sized stories. It took me years, embarrassingly too many years, to figure out that God is not calling me or you or anybody to be a superstar. There's one superstar in the story. It's him. He's God. Now, we're just called to be faithful. Whatever that means, wherever that leads us, whatever that does, we just listen and obey. That's all he asks out of us, is that we remain faithful today. What's he called you to do today? Well, this. Well, then just do it. Whether you understand it or not, like it or not, get it or not, see the big picture. I'll be honest, I want to know the whole plan before I take that first step. Where are we going, Jesus? So I'll let you know. Just take that next step. Whatever it is, big or small, may seem insignificant to us, it's part of his plan and his story and his thing. Let him take care of the rest. He may be calling you to pray for people. I don't know who that is. Your neighbor, your boss, your coworkers, family members. Yeah. He may be calling you to teach. He may be calling you to talk to someone about Jesus where you work. He may be calling you to give groceries to your neighbor. I don't know what he's calling you to do. I'm just making stuff up. But whatever he's called you to do it. Whatever it is, don't worry about it being too small. This won't get me my name written in the Bible, so. This won't get me in the 8 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news. They don't have 8 o'clock news. If so, God seems to shine through the little stuff. Next thing, don't get sidetracked by hardship. Sometimes that's just life. Sometimes hardship happens and it'll cripple us or anger us or we'll react negatively toward God. Why did you let this happen? Just be careful. Just don't get sidetracked. Sometimes it's just life. Some of the people mentioned in Hebrews 11 had some pretty rough things going on. Joseph, like I said, sold as a slave, years in jail. He was there quite a while. Jephthah's daughter died prematurely. That's rough. To quote Hebrews, verse 36, we read this, others suffered mocking, flogging, even chains, imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. That seems kind of serious. All right? Having a rough day? Killed with a sword. Went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated. Who is this guy that says blessings to you if you're a believer? Oh, please, right? Sometimes life's just rough. Sometimes it's just what it is. Every once in a while, I will meet a Christian that says, God doesn't want anybody to be sick at all. And it's probably your lack of faith if you're sick. I'm like, that's not scriptural. Sometimes it's the sickness that increases our faith and strengthens our faith and deepens our faith. Sometimes he allows us to have pain and all these things that are mentioned in Hebrews 11 because he wants to accomplish something through us. I don't know what. Maybe it's a word that you get to say to a doctor or a nurse or to whoever it is you're working with in your issue. Sometimes life's just hard. And there's no real purpose. It's just life. It's just what it is. And you've lived long enough. You've had rough times. You know what I'm talking about. Our job during those times is simply to be faithful. Just be faithful. Keep being faithful. Let God do what he wants. Third thing, final thing, don't lose heart because you're not seeing the end result. Again, I always want to know where this is headed. Okay, God, you probably got big plans. What are they? Just let me see. Give me a glimpse. He might not. The big plans might be 3 generations from now of something that I got started. I don't know. Abraham didn't see the descendants too numerous to count. He saw Isaac. He's like, this family reunion is pretty small. It's kind of pitiful. We're a nation? Whoa. Some of the people in Hebrews 11 just never saw what God did through them. And that's okay, because, again, it's not our story. It's God's. It's something he's got going on. And sometimes you may wonder if what you're doing really matters. You know, am I really helping people grow in their faith? I know as teachers, we often think that. Preachers, it's so intangible. I don't know if you've grown at all. I don't know if what I'm saying is helpful or I mean, how do I know if it even matters? Who knows? Again, the reality is it's not our concern. We just do. We're just faithful. Hey, teach this lesson. Hey, preach this sermon. That's all that matters. Who knows in our teachers the sparks you're putting in our children and in our adults that's going to be a ripple effect throughout their class or throughout their work or that's God's going to do something to that. That's all. You don't need to know. You just be faithful. You just do your thing. Do what God's called you to do. Who knows that one conversation in a class leads to a conversation at work, leads to a conversation where someone comes to accept Jesus Christ and who then shares the faith with their family, who then shares it with their friends, who ends up teaching a class somewhere else and impacts a small child, who grows up to share Christ with their college roommate, who goes on to be a preacher to tens of thousands. I don't know. I'm just saying, we just don't know. It's not our concern. We just be faithful. You just teach that class. You just disciple those people. There's all kinds of little stories out there where people were just living out their faith and God swooped in. They didn't even know they were making an impact on anybody, and God swooped in and made some change. And they might not ever find out. You might not, or it might be years later you find out. Several years ago, I got the coolest message on my birthday. It was from a friend in I'll say from an acquaintance in Atlantic. We lived in Atlantic for a few years. Anyway, it just said, "Happy birthday, thank you for bringing me to Jesus." And I read that, and I saw who was from. I'm like, what? I don't even, like, what? I just didn't really know. See, there's this guy, a young guy, in Atlantic. He was in his 20s or so. When I met him, I was probably in my 30s. And we played basketball together. We were both tall, inside guys. We'd always be pounding against each other. And we were pretty rough on each other. It was fun. I mean, it was good, healthy fun. When they got married, he didn't know any preachers, so he asked me to do the wedding. And his wife, his fiance, knew Cheryl through a work relationship. And so it was kind of like, hey, well, how about this guy? So I did their wedding. Obviously talked a little bit about Jesus, but he was, fairly resistant, and so I didn't push it on him. I just kind of hey, Jesus, Of course, the wedding was all about Jesus and that kind of thing, and never came to church or anything. A couple years later, we moved here to Pathway, and it was a couple years after we moved here that he mysteriously one day walks into the office at the church there in Atlantic where my friend Dale was now preaching, and he says, "Tell me everything you can about Jesus." He's like, now there's a preacher's dream right there. It's like, oh, okay. So they started a relationship, Bible study, discipleship thing, and he grew in Christ. And he to this day is extremely active in the church, loves Jesus. His whole family became believers. Actually, he's been here a few times this year playing guitar. You see this mystery guy from Atlantic once in a while that shows up, and he's an excellent guitar player. And I just threw on Facebook one day, hey, looking for a guitar player, and he's like, really? And so he drove in from Atlantic a few times this past year to play for us. He's a cool, godly, God-fearing guy. I still don't know. I should probably ask him sometime, what did I have to do with that? I don't know. I just love Jesus and must have had some conversation. It was really Dale that really brought him to Jesus and trained him and discipled him and grew him in the faith. But God used me somehow, somewhere. Point is, who knows how God's using you where you work or in your family or in your neighborhood. As long you just keep being faithful. You just be faithful. You just do what God calls you to do every day, whatever that is, and do it and honor God and let God take care of the story. He'll take care of the rest. That's living out our faith. That is having a confidence in the one who never fails, in the one who is awesome and strong and powerful and is always true. And I just believe whatever he says will happen. So if he gives me an assignment, I'll just do it and trust he knows why. I don't have to know all the other stuff. Approach the coming year that way, and if you haven't been living that way, it will revolutionize your life, but also those of people around you.